Okay. So we will begin our first online conference during the coronavirus crisis, the COVID-19 crisis. We are in times of trouble, and we are trying to collaborate together and be together for one another. This conference is called Holocaust Research in Challenging Times. We, the Western Galilee College in Akko, are the hosts today, and we're very happy to have you all. We will have our first session will begin with 5 speakers. Before that, I would like to ask Dr. Boaz Cohen, the Holocaust Studies Program, head of the Holocaust Studies Program at Western Galilee, to say a few things, a few words. So Boaz, please, thank you.
Okay, it is really wonderful to see you all here. We had a dream of bringing together people during these times. We had a discussion whether people really need it or not, whether there is a need. Obviously, if we have 260 registrations, there is some sort of need for this. So it's really, I'm really happy to see you all here. We really hope to have conferences where we can see you face to face, but still I think this is one of the important things for me about Academy is meeting people and listening to what other people are doing. This is one of the things that are really building my, making it worthwhile for me. And I felt this need really bad. In Israel, we do have a lot of academic workshops in Zoom. And so this is not we are not the first, although we do one of the first ones on children's history in Hebrew. But the idea of making an international conference, taking into account the fact that people can't sit all day in front of the computer and making a space breaks between the panels, bringing it into 2 days. All this is something that is unique to what we are doing. And I think that seeing, getting the hours right for the US and for us at the same time. So seeing you all here just shows that we do something right, and I am sure that hearing will certainly make it worthwhile. I'll just say that this conference was made possible by the effort of 2 young and capable researchers, Richard Daniela Olszewski-Stern and Ronnie Mikel Arieli. They did the hard work here, the hard carrying. And I'm thanking them I'm thanking the whole Western Galilee Holocaust Studies team for giving a hand here in the conference, and I think we can start now.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Ask everyone to mute your Zoom. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much, Boaz, for your kind words. We will start the first session with 5 speakers. There will be 7 minutes for each speaker. And after that, we will have a discussion, and I will ask you to send the questions, the Q&As to the chat. Me and the co-host, Daniela Olszewski-Stern, will read your questions, and our speakers will, of course, try to answer them. Our first speaker for today is Yaron. I'll just mute you all, okay, if that's fine, and the speaker will unmute himself. So, okay. Our first speaker for today is Jan Burzlaff, and he is a PhD candidate at Harvard University. How about that? And his topic for today is In the Shadow of the Gas Chambers, Neighbors, Social Ties, and Daily Life Around the Death Camp of Belzec. Jan, the Zoom floor is yours, please.
All right. Try to share my screen. I think you need to stop your sharing so I can.
Okay, so I stopped mine. You can share now yours.
Okay. I hope it is visible.
Can everybody see? Okay, fine. Please.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, both Daniela and Roni, for this really amazing opportunity, I should say. Challenging times are easily lived through in a community of like-minded people. So to all, thanks for being here. And what I would like to do with you in the next 7 minutes is to ask, what is a neighbor in the Holocaust? In the legacy of Jan Pogrom's disruptive book, Neighbor usually stands for pogroms, betrayal during the so-called Judenjagd, ghettos, and the countryside. Yet, the intricate relations between non-Jews and the death camps have never been systematically studied. They're often terms, when you look into accounts of the Reinhard camps, they're called locals. This is not due to the excellent scholarship on Operation Reinhard, but rather to the scant attention that non-Jewish video recordings have yet received. My paper today is part of a broader project on the neighbors of the Reinhard camps, whom I define as civilians living in the vicinity of the camps and who have not killed any Jews during the war. So far, I have gathered more than 55 video testimonies from the Toby and Jeff Herr video archive at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, testimonies from and hundreds of pages from the Soviet District Commission, West German investigations of the 1960s, as well as Claude Lanzmann's interviews of Shoah. But the late Lanzmann actually left Belzec out in his Shoah, and even within the Reinhard camps, we know the least information about Belzec. My paper includes 12 untapped video testimonies that shift the focus from the camp to its surroundings. A social history of Belzec's non-Jewish community demonstrates that the strength of social ties was a matter of life and death. It reveals insight into the daily genocide and the relevance of the Holocaust for the village socioeconomic life. In the shadow of the gas chambers, the social dynamics were built on pre-war social ties that the strange of the Nazi occupation and the immediate camp ultimately destroyed. Centered on these non-Jewish villagers, my paper within our panel, The Holocaust on the Ground, is a systematic analysis of social relations that highlights the inattentions of the village community and the inhabitants often conflicted in shared norms with the Ukrainian guards and local non-deported Jews. I will briefly elaborate on the paper's 3 sections. First, I propose a more systematic methodology for non-Jewish testimonies. The 1998 interviews are what Hannah Pollen-Galley defines as the collective forensic type. All witnesses were born in Belzec between 1908 and 1929. Among the first ones of their kind for the Holocaust, these non-Jewish video testimonies share growing awareness of the events with survivor accounts of the 1990s, but they have several key characteristics that I would briefly present. First, the utter refusal or great reluctance of many residents to be filmed, to be interviewed. Their attempts to ease conscience at the time, 1998, when public awareness of the Holocaust scale was sharply increasing in post-Soviet Poland. For example, Janina Spasu, who was living on a farm 50 meters from the camps, contradicts herself when she claims that she was living. Memory scholar Aleida Assmann has called the installation of guilt the distancing from the camp through youth and geographical distance. As any oral source, we have to understand the memory culture it comes from, and I look forward to the panel on memory wars and Professor Bauer's keynote. Here, local and regional memory politics in 1998 Poland played a huge role. Second, it is pointless to try, as some have done, to determine in a pretty much clear-cut way how much the villagers knew of the extermination. The first houses were indeed 350 meters from the camp. Instead, I suggest tackling the social dynamics. At some point in 1942, Jan Grabowski has famously argued, Jewish life lost all value in southeastern Poland. The testimonies allow us to elaborate more systematically on the social ties these villagers had with the SS men, the 60 to 80 Travniki guards, and the ever-changing Jewish slave laborers. It is clear that the death camp radically altered the social fabrics. Most visibly, the Travniki guard produced deep rifts within what otherwise could be mistaken for a homogeneous Polish community facing the genocide, which is what the interviews wish to convey. Within this predominantly Catholic community, many internal visions continued to shape the genocide on the ground. The most valuable insights concern Jewish attempts to survive and its gender dimensions. Pre-existing personal ties were vital after 1941. After escaping, for example, from a rail derailment in 1942, a young Jewish mother and her baby knocked on Aniela Bob's door, you see her on the right. but their parents were among the many who chased them away. These depictions of fleeing victims often involve women. Moving away, what I do, from the still familiar tropes of Jewish women as either maternal figures or passive victims, these women allow to survive in the camp and try to survive. And they show us that many attempt to survive in the camp, around the camp, and women fight for their children near the camp. Third and finally, my paper reconstructs a typical day of summer 1942, especially the importance of daytime and nighttime, which also involves the cultural history of dreams. In line with our overall conference, it is a work in progress. First, there are internal variations I try to look at right now. Unlike testimonies from Sobibor and Treblinka, Belzec's inhabitants often name the local Jews who stand out. I need to make sense of this intimacy, this communal violence. Second, the primary value of such testimonies of non-Jews entangled but not actively participating in killings lies in testimonies' power certainly to unearth voices that have been vanished. Further research avenues include the lived experience in and around Nazi camps, for which Nick Waxman recently most called, and that of non-Jews during the Holocaust by ballots. And I'm thinking of all the testimonies of in Yahat Inu. This approach is about non-Jews, about ordinary non-Jews, if I may say, that lived in the most immediate geographical but not emotional proximity. Given the exacerbation of broader social fabrics next to the gas chambers, I would argue that these events were far from being at the periphery of the Holocaust. Rather, I think the camp surroundings are central to understanding its core. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the panels and the conference and all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Jan. And we will move to the next speaker. Our next speaker is Lovro Kralj, and he's a PhD candidate at Central European University. The topic for today is regional approach to the Holocaust in Croatia, minority politics, collaboration, and persecution. Lovro, the Zoom floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. But can I share my screen with you?
Yes, of course. Please do.
Okay. Okay. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Not yet, just a second. Sorry. Okay, let's do it without the screen then. So,
okay.
I apologize for the technical difficulties. Thank you again for letting me present to my research at this innovative conference. So the topic of my talk today is about how the regional approach to the Holocaust can change our perspectives, which are often dominated by a top-down or institutional or just elite-driven or elite orchestrated event. So my research and my PhD is focused on the analysis of the Holocaust in 3 different cities, and the recipe is rather simple. We have 3 cities of different sizes. We have 3 cities which are located in 3 different regions, and we have 3 cities with different ethnic structures. Unfortunately, you cannot see the structure, so I have to tell them to you, but the 3 case studies here are Kralj, which has a 95% Croatian population and a tiny Jewish and Serbian minority. We have Sarajevo, which is a deeply multi-ethnic city with 37% Muslim population, 27% Catholic population, and the rest are were Serbian and Jewish population, very significant Jewish population of 12%, or around 11,000 people. And then we have the city of Osijek, which has a considerable German, Hungarian, Serbian, and Jewish minority, and a relative Croatian majority. Now, what all these 3 case studies show is, first of all, how anti-Semitic policies, anti-Semitic propaganda, the persecution of Jews can influence and destabilize the inter-ethnic balance or the inter-ethnic relations which existed before the war. So this is at the core of my PhD research, how anti-Semitism influences the inter-ethnic dynamics, and then in turn, how does that dynamic influence the persecution, whether it speeds it up or it slows it down. So all these three case studies present also a certain kind of challenge to the mainstream narratives, and especially top-down approaches which focus on central institutions as the main departure point for the interpretation. The first city, the city of Križevci, and the smallest of the three, shows how early the anti-Semitic persecution began and how independently from the central authority it began. So the Ustasha regime was founded on the 15th of April. This is when Ante Pavelić, the leader of the movement, arrived to Zagreb and formed the first government. The persecution in Križevci, however, started 2 days earlier, which means that the local Ustasha committee acted pretty much independently from any center of power because the center of power was simply not there. They introduced a plethora of anti-Semitic measures, which were all implemented before they were implemented on a state level. Now, Križevci is also an interesting case because the delegation from that city went to the center of power, to Zagreb, to provide the government with its own experiences of the persecution. So we could even argue that at least a part of the policies of anti-Jewish policies later introduced at the state level were modeled on a very small locality where they were tested before. Now, the second case of Sarajevo shows a very interesting dynamic between the Muslim community and the Catholic community within the city. According to the Ustasha ideology, both Serbs and Jews were supposed to disappear from the face of the country. This was a part of ethnic homogenization and national homogenization of the independent state of Croatia. Now, in this context, the only two remaining communities in the future would be Catholics and Muslims. So the anti-Semitic legislation and the aims at the macro level transferred onto the local level created some unpredictable tensions. Those tensions was that Muslim community and the Catholic community started to compete for power at the local level. And they did so in a very unusual way. They started to convert as many Jews as possible and Serbs to their own respective religious communities as a form of boosting their numbers and therefore securing the future political dominance over the city politics. Now, this created a huge amount of tension between the two communities, which was noted by the regime in Zagreb and the central authorities. So what they did is that they sent a deportation expert into Sarajevo in order to alleviate the situation. Now, this deportation expert, who is called Ivan Tolj and is not very well known, both within the Croatian historiography or internationally, decided that deportation of Jews in Sarajevo was one of the best ways to alleviate the various difficulties that the city was facing at the time, including the food supply situation, housing situation, but also this inter-ethnic or inter-religious dynamics. This is when the unprecedented deportations from Sarajevo began, where approximately 7,000 people were deported basically from October 41 to January 42. This magnitude of deportations was not seen in Croatia up until that point. And then finally, in the city of Osijek, we can also see a very interesting dynamic between the German minority and the Croatian majority, where the conflict between the two for the local power, here Germans consisted or formed around 30% of the entire population of the city, created the dynamic of minority, or the Jewish community, became the token of this power struggle between the Germans and Croats at the local level. What is very interesting, in complete opposition to Sarajevo, is that the Croatian authorities, although they were deeply anti-Semitic and extremely discriminatory towards the Jewish community, refused to implement any further radicalization on the local level, other than the one issued at the state level. Now, why was why was this implemented in such a way? Not because of any sort of humanitarian reasons, but again, it was a power play. Whoever held the control over the Jewish community locally also had held the key to the potential economic power which you could gain by getting their property. So as long as the Jewish community was in the hands of the local police, they could have a legitimate claim over the Jewish property at the local level, and it couldn't be transferred to the state or into the hands of the local German minority. And that was a great fear. All of this was equalized, and there was the same outcome in the end. In August 1942, in all three cities, the deportations were implemented primarily top-down. But the period from April 1941 up until August 42 basically shows how various forms of anti-Semitic persecution could be influenced by local motives, local actors, and we can also see some of the very important agents who are invisible from the perspective of the Central Archives, but are very much visible from the perspective of the local ones. I will not go any further. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Lovro, for your very interesting insights. I would like to move to our next speaker. In the meantime, if any of you have any questions, please write them down in the chat room. And we'll get back to you during the discussion. Our next speaker is Dr. Marie-Dominique Asselin, and she is from the Polish Center for Holocaust Research at the University of Ottawa. And her topic today is Justice as Witness, Jews Facing Polish Courts During the German Occupation, 1939 to 1942. Please, Marie.
Thank you. Okay, I will have to. Oh my God, I cannot share the screen, so we'll just go like this. Sorry. Can you see me? No?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, but that's okay. Okay, so thank you for having me this morning. I'm really glad to be, I will share with you in 7 minutes what is my PhD dissertation. So I will try to be quick. I guess we will have more questions after all. So I will start right away. So in February 1940, Armstrong, the governor of the General Gouvernement, determined that where German security or economic interests were affected, German special law were applied in the General Gouvernement. Otherwise, Polish law remained in force. In other words, while the violation of German wartime regulations were automatically referred to the German court, the entire common criminality was still heard by Polish ones. My research has started with the exploration of Polish court records from the wartime, which has been largely absent from previous research concerning the Holocaust. In Poland, during the German occupation, the municipal court was often the only physical space where Poles and Jews could legally meet each other, even after the closure of the ghettos. Because of the lack of involvement of Germans in this administrative sphere, the court were the rare space where Poles and Jews could continue to interact without any over-interference and control by the German occupier. This particular situation, which is a Polish society outside of the German occupier, allows to see these relations from a different perspective. By looking at the implication of the judicial institution in the everyday struggle for survival of Polish Jews during the first year of the occupation. The documents from the court also present latent and active anti-Semitism and abuse of power made by the official working for the court and by the Polish citizen. Many cases present Polish police officer or judge willing to pass by the law to satisfy their own agenda. On a social level, the court record also answers several questions regarding the life and death of Jews before the mass deportation. These records, because of the information collected about Jews, show the life during the first year of the war from a different perspective. Through the prism of the court record, one can see the evolutions of the Germans' regulations imposed during the occupations and the consequences they had on the Jewish population. So my research regards anti-Semitism and the relation between Poles and Jews from three perspectives: the administrative one, a social one, and a memorial one. To show the different possibilities of these records, I will give only one case example today. So that is from the municipal court of Outfosk, which is a small town 25 kilometers from the capital. So it started in September 1940 when Aaron Takus, a 45-year-old Jew, was accused of assaulting a Polish officer, Felix Gorzącki, while traveling on a train between Falenicia and Outfosk. The policeman said that he arrested the Jew because he was involved in smuggling. Takus was accused of resisting arrest, assaulting the police officer, and finally of trying to flee. When the judge asked Takus what happened that day, the accused presented a very different story. He said that he was not smuggling, and only for that reason did he arrest, and he insists that he had not assaulted anyone. So the next year, in May 1941, during the trial, Takus was found guilty and was sentenced in 1 week in prison. Reading Takus' case, one can find important information regarding the occupations and the relation between Poles and Jews. First, the policeman said in his testimony that he arrested Takus because he was involved in smuggling. Smuggling was strictly forbidden and punishable by German laws. According to the German regulations, a Polish police officer who found a Jew guilty of smuggling had to send him directly to the German court. Officer Gorzącki chose to follow a different path of action here. Furthermore, Takus was on a train between Falenicia and Outfosk, thus violating another German law. As on January 1st, 1940, German regulations made it illegal for Jews to use public transportation without a permission. The decision taken by Officer Gorzącki to send Takus' case to the Polish court speaks for itself. Never in his testimony did Gorzącki, his colleague from the police station, nor the judge discuss the violation of the German regulation. It appeared that both police officers exercised their freedom of action because of the lack of the German supervision to have recourse to the Polish system or justice in which they could, to an extent, control the fate of the Jewish suspect. In addition, the case of Takus gives important information about the Jewish life and death in the ghetto. The sentence was pronounced on May 27, 1941, but in March 1942, Takus has not yet served his sentence. The police stations of Outfosk sent a letter to the court and to the Jewish police stations in the ghetto asking for an explanation. The ghetto police informed the police station that Aaron Takus has died in January 1942 and he was buried in the Outfosk Jewish cemetery. A note from the Judenrat also corroborated this fact. The cause of Takus' death remained unknown, but from the note sent from the Jewish police stations, we can conclude that he likely died in the ghetto and was not murdered by a German or Pole. Finally, the court record can help the Shoah name database at Yad Vashem because a person willing to give information about one member of his family was not always close to him or her. Factual error on the form could have been made. So when looking for Takus' name in the Shoah name database, we found his information. So it is written that Aaron Takus was born in Ostrów Maziowiecka, Poland in 1987 to Moshek and Leah. He was a storekeeper and a businessman. Aaron Takus was murdered in the Shoah. This information is based on the page of testimony submitted by a researcher, Judy Goldstein-Ostrov. Comparing this information to the document found in the municipal court of Outfosk, we found that he was born on April 15, 1897 in Ostrów Maziowiecka. He died on January 18, 1942 and was buried in the Jewish cemetery in Outfosk. In addition, Takus had 6 children aged from 22 months to 8 years old, had no criminal record before this incident, and he knew how to read and write. The case of Aaron Takus is not the only one that could help make important correction to the existing database and records. Similar data can be gleaned from every court document involving Jewish victim, accuser, or witness. I'm talking here about tens of thousands of cases in the old General Gouvernement. Not only does this new information corrected some existing inaccuracies, it also had human dimension to the historical records of the Polish Jews. Because of these documents, Arum Tacus is no longer a simple statistic. He has a tangible past, a date of birth, and death. More importantly, Tacus is no longer the victim to whom who could have only attributed the words murder during the Shoah. Thanks to the court documents, we know now that Tacus in fact died in the ghetto and that his remains were buried in the Jewish cemetery of Ottawa. Even though there is no tombstone in his name, Tacus has been spared the anonymity of the hundreds of thousands murder at Treblinka. Thank you.
Yaron, you are on mute.
Sorry about that. We are learning. Thank you very much, Dr. Marie-Dominique Asselin. And our next speaker is Dr. Andrew Close from the Mandel Center at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. He will be speaking today about the Polish Kriminalpolizei and the Holocaust in the German-occupied Galicia, after action reports from August 1942 through February 1944. The floor is yours, please.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen here.
Okay. Please try. Okay.
Is that working for everyone?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be with you all today. I would like to thank the faculty and staff of the Holocaust Studies program of Western Galilee College for organizing this conference. I'm going to be speaking about a project that is developed out of my research in the Jack, Joseph, and Morton Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where I work on the museum's Encyclopedia of Camps and Ghettos project. Today I'm speaking in a personal capacity. The opinions in this presentation are mine alone and do not necessarily reflect those of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum or of the United States Holocaust Memorial Council. During the last 2 decades, numerous studies on Polish police in German-occupied Poland have added to our knowledge about how some Polish police cooperated with German police in their persecution of Jews during the Holocaust. However, as Jan Grabowski identified in a 2016 lecture at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, one entitled, quote, "The Polish Police Collaboration in the Holocaust," quote, "Historians know next to nothing about the wartime activities of the Polish Creepo. In theory, the Polish Creepo was to focus on investigating common crimes. In reality, it became one of the essential components of the Nazi terror apparatus," close quote. While researching an encyclopedia article about detention facilities that the German SIPO and SD operated in the part of German-occupied Poland known as District Galician, I came across an interesting file in an archival collection from the Lviv State Oblast Archive in Ukraine, a file that enables us to address the research problem that Grabowski has identified. This file consists of approximately 200 pages of records from the German SIPO and SD office that was then located in the present-day city of Lviv, which in Polish was known as Lvov and in German as Lemberg. The file contains reports that members of a special Polish police force submitted to their German supervisors between August 1942 and February 1944, after they had either fired their handguns, their rifles, or their submachine guns in the course of their police duties. The name of this police force was the Polish Criminal Police, the Polish Kriminalpolizei, or the Polish Creepo. Its members came mostly from the Polish pre-war investigative police, the Policja Śledcza. After the German occupation, this police force was subordinated to the German criminal police, the Kriminalpolizei or the Creepo, which formed part of the German SIPO and SD. In these reports, Polish Creepo personnel explained the reasons why they had fired their weapons, at whom they had shot, and how much replacement ammunition they therefore required. Now, before discussing the patterns of Polish police activity that emerged from these reports, it must be first emphasized that the historical context of the actions of certain members of the Polish Creepo was, of course, the German invasion of Poland. After its establishment in German-occupied Poland, it was the German state security apparatus that played the leading role in organizing and perpetrating the Holocaust on Polish soil. Research on those Poles who worked with the German state security apparatus also helps us to better understand the historical context of those Poles who were active in resistance groups and those Poles who provided aid to Jews. 4 patterns in Polish Creepo police activity can be identified in these reports. First, the Polish Creepo carried out general law enforcement activities. For example, on August 29, 1942 in Lvov, one member of the Polish Creepo reported that he had shot a known Polish cattle thief after the thief appeared to him to be reaching into his waistband for a weapon, despite the Polish Creepo man's instructions for him to surrender. Second, the Polish Creepo arrested Jews whom they encountered incidentally while performing other official duties. For example, while on patrol on the afternoon of June 20th, 1943 in Sarajevo, a Polish Creepo man recognized a Jewish man who was walking down the street without wearing the armband required to identify him as Jewish. When confronted, the man ran away until the Polish Creepo man fired 4 warning shots and the man stopped running and surrendered. Third, the Polish Creepo also organized searches to look for Jews in hiding, whom they then either arrested or killed. For example, on May 23, 1943, a Polish Creepo man wrote that he had received a tip that there were Jews hiding in a bunker beneath the floorboards of an old mill in Sarajevo. When no one responded to his command to come out of hiding, the Polish Creepo man fired 3 shots into the bunker. After this, he wrote in his report, 3 Jewish women and 4 children emerged from the bunker. 1 woman and 2 older children managed to run away from him, but he arrested and took the others back to the police station. Fourth, some Polish Creepo men participated in mass shootings of Jews. For example, in an October 30th, 1942 report, a Polish Creepo platoon leader wrote, quote, "During the Jewish action that was carried out in Brzeżany, I fired 100 rounds of ammunition. Please send replacement ammunition." Close quote. Similarly, on December 16th, 1943, a different Creepo officer wrote that in another so-called action in the woods near Zaleshi, he fired his submachine gun 64 times and then fired his service revolver 22 times. To conclude, my research on this topic is ongoing, working together with Tomasz Friedel, who has done extensive research on Polish post-war trials of individuals accused of collaboration in Polish courts between 1944 and 1956. I hope to delve deeply into several questions. First, did similar patterns of Polish police activities involving the Polish Creepo exist in other parts of German-occupied Poland? How much continuity was there of personnel within the ranks of the Polish Creepo during the occupation? To what degree were they deployed to round up Jews as opposed to assigned to perform other police functions? Did their relationship to the German security apparatus change notably over time? Thank you very much for your time and attention. I greatly appreciate any questions or feedback or recommendations where I can find other material on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Close, for your very intriguing words there. We will move to the next speaker, which is Katarzyna Grybowska, and she is a PhD candidate at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. She will be speaking today about peripheral forests as a non-site of memory, the influence of human remains on the local transfer of memory. So please, the Zoom floor is yours, and you can share your screen.
Hello, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I will share the screen indeed. Okay. Do you see that?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. The aim of my research is to uncover and analyze functioning of a Holocaust by bullets place that contains unmarked, uncommemorated human remains. I conduct field research, interviews, research material witnesses, materiality and topography of the place. The object of my research, Krępiecki Forest, is a peripheral forest in eastern Poland, near Lublin, and the former concentration camp Majdanek. Adjacent to two villages, Krępiec and Kazimierzówka, it was a site where mass genocide took place. People, among others prisoners of the Lublin ghetto and Majdanek concentration camp, were shot. The victims' corpses, both of those killed in the forest and driven to the place by lorries, were hidden in the ground or burned on pyres. Some burying grounds were dug up in order to burn the victims' remains. During my speech, firstly, I would like to speak of how the local people, the aforementioned neighbors, were exposed to the view of human remains, as it is crucial for the local memory. Secondly, using a chosen example, I shortly discuss the bystanders' attitude towards the forest, focusing on the narration the witnesses transferred to the next generation. And finally, I mention some practices observed in the forest. During the Nazi occupation, some executions conducted in the forest could be observed from local houses. What's more, the burying grounds were covered carelessly. Victims' limbs protruded from the ground and used to be seen by villagers, including curious children, one of whom, now an elderly lady, I have interviewed. She told me about human remains brought to her backyard by the dogs. The perpetrators committed genocide in front of the whole community of bystanders. People very well oriented in the necrotopography of the forest. The first investigation in Krępiecki forest was carried out in 1944, and local people were allowed to watch the trial exhumation. In 1946, during the local vision, the Polish investigators of German Crimes Committee confirmed the presence of numerous human remains in the forest floor. As a result, citizens of Lublin were invited to take part in the social act of burial of the remains. The first 4-hour-long stage of this action was carried by the scouts, who formed a line and went through the forest collecting human remains. They filled in a coffin that was buried in the Catholic rite. At the place of the burial, at the place of the burial, a cross and later a monument was erected. What struck me when I read about the action was what the forest had to look like if the scouts could collect the bones without digging. And what seemed even more important was the conviction that in less than 4 hours they could not collect all the remains. Exactly. According to the people I have interviewed, human remains were to be easily found in the forest till about the 80s. They were dug out in a procedure of digging up and throwing corpses away while searching for gold, locally known as excavations. The forest ground was marked, scarred by all the aforementioned digging and redigging the ground. It contains index signs of genocide and the excavations process. The local landscape can be read by those who know its alphabet language, and those place reading skills are transferred to next generations, usually indirectly in a system of prohibitions. This is the first page of testimony of Roman Podolskis, a miller from Kazimierzówka, who observed the executions. A picture of the forest landscape and the following paragraph. The view of the Krępiec forest, the view of the Krępiec forest from the west is beautiful, right? Forest glades are beautiful, and many readers, for example children, would like to arrange a playground here. Weren't it for? The author had children who used to play in the forest. They heard from their father that it was forbidden to eat strawberries, which grew particularly well at the place of executions. They listened to adults that they talks about the genocide and learned how to read the landscape. This is a picture made during the walk with Podolski's daughter, as she was explaining to me how to discern if the hole has been dug by a human and not by a fox. After all the years of the visual presence of human remains in the memory of the genocide, in form of contamination, the memory of genocide in form of contamination of the forest was preserved in the consciousness of the locals. It is connected with the attitudes to the forest environment, gestures of littering the forest, and actions of its cleaning. This awareness of history is frustrating enough to cause misreadings of some eco-friendly gestures as this one, an act of blocking the path in order not to let cars into the forest. The act of eco-activism was interpreted by some locals as a gesture of care for the peace of the dead, and it happens to be destroyed. The only both institutional and local gesture of commemoration is an annual Catholic Mass conducted in front of the monument. It is followed by a commemorative school celebration. Its program is associated with the war underground movement and national heroism, not with victims of mass executions and the Jews. The history of Kępieński Forest is nation or worldwide forgotten, referring to uncommemorated or not well enough commemorated places of mass genocide that could possibly become a site of memory, but did not. I use the term of non-site of memory. The term was introduced by Claude Lanzmann and conceptualized by Roma Sendyka. Now, it's the key term in an interdisciplinary project on non-sites of memory I'm part of. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katarzyna. That is our final paper, and I would like to say thank you very much for 5 most innovative papers in the field of Holocaust research. What a wonderful way to share it through the current crisis. I would like to begin the discussion, and first of all, I will unmute you all. So I think it'd be better if we can ask, or maybe we'll start with the questions that I see here in the chat. I see Anka has had a few remarks. So Anka, would you like to begin?
Sorry, I wasn't understood the last.
You had a remark to Jan on the first talk.
Yeah, I had one. About the book of Jane Gross, The Neighbors, which I have found at Center of Jewish Study in Cluj-Napoca a few years ago. It was a very interesting book and fit to the first presentation about a massacre in Dziewane by Polish Jews by Polish ethnics, and the conclusion of Jante Gos was that not only the Germans were guilty for the Holocaust, as some negationists say that only the Germans are guilty for the Holocaust, but also cohabiting nationalities. And it was also a remark to complete what the author of the first presentation was saying about Polish Jews.
Okay, I think it's my turn to respond, right? That's an interesting, well, I mean, that's the basic foundation. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'm saying that this is basically the starting point. If you look into neighbors, I mean, you immediately bump into Jan Gross' book, and it has had a huge impact, I think, on defining neighbors. And my paper, when I started, really, I was fortunate to find these testimonies. I was not looking for them. I stumbled across them in the archive. And the Jan Gross neighbors, they're actively killing. I mean, these are nationalist, Polish and Ukrainian nationalists killing in small communities. And he took the example of Jedwabne. You have also Jeff Kopstein and Jason Wittenberg in 2018 that published a book called Intimate Violence, which takes a broader view of different communities. My paper is much more about really civilians who actively killing. And this is much harder to define. Most studies, they write about locals and, what is a local? And what does this tell us about the local unfolding of the Holocaust on the ground? Because not each community is the same and has the same unfolding in terms of groups, in terms of motivations. And so my interest right now is to look at these neighbors, these civilians who don't kill, but who don't help either, and to really understand what is going on there. But that's that's the foundation of communal violence, of course.
Okay, thank you. There's another question from Megan. To Andrew, would you like to address?
Zamknij mi drzwi i weź ją na dół, bo ja nie chcę na nią ciągle patrzeć, czy...
Megan? Okay, so I'll just read. Megan?
Okay, fine.
Would you like to read the question?
Ale ja nie chcę, bo nie będę na nią patrzeć, jak ja słucham.
Okay, so I'll read the question for Andrew. Regarding the Polish, my question for Andrew regarding the Polish police near Lvov, to what extent does the image that the Soviet occupation in Eastern Poland, Western Ukraine, 1939-1941 may have affected personnel and policy culture? Please, Andrew.
Thank you very much for the question, Megan. I think it's an excellent question, one that I have yet to see any documents that will help me answer. One of the next phases of the research I'm working on, I'm hoping that with my partner on this topic, Tomasz Friedel, based on his expertise in some of these post-war Polish trials and to some of the accused collaborators, I'm hoping that in that type of information, we'll be able to find more about the background of these the officers whom I mentioned. From the reports that I've been working with, I've compiled a list of approximately 90 names. And so having their rank and full name, that's a basis for which to search for more information about them. But as yet, I don't have any sources that would allow me to answer that question.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. There is a question here from Yochai Copenhagen. And this question is to all of you. The question is, what is your view on the cooperation of the Polish police force with the perpetrators, vice versa, the current Polish government views, claiming the Polish established bodies did not participate in the mass murders? So, who would like to begin?
I think maybe it's for Andrew, this question.
Well, I'm limiting myself to the documents that I've seen. I would say that we have these examples of reports written by members of the Polish Creepo in which they described various atrocities they committed against Jews. And I'm hesitant to make any other generalizations beyond the specific sources that I've seen, but I think it's clear from these documents that we have at least some members of the Polish Creepo who are working with the German state security apparatus.
Can I answer something?
Please. Marie.
Yes, can I answer? I'm not looking at mass murder, and I'm not looking at the collaboration of the Blue Police with the German, but during my research, I noticed and I found that the police officer working, they were working for the German, but also for the Polish government at the time. Not the government, because there was not Polish government, but they were still working with the Polish law, with the Polish codes. And in this way, they participate, I found, not in mass murder, but like they have a role to play in the fate of the Jew. I worked on court record, and I see that the police officer and determine the fate of the Jews going to the court or not. They have the possibility to send the Jew in the German court or the Polish ones. And so I don't know, their cooperation or collaboration with the Nazi, but I'm sure they had their own agenda. Not all of them, obviously, but some of them.
Yaron, אתה על מיוט.
Would anyone like to remark some further on this issue? Okay, so we'll go to the next question. This is from Manya. Manya, would you like to ask your question to everybody? Manya, are you with us? Okay. So I'll read the question. This is to all of you. How widespread was the policy of excavations post-Shoah, digging for gold? I've heard of it, but I'm wondering how prevalent and or widespread it was across Poland, and also in the phenomenon also existed in parts of Poland that post-war became Ukrainian, etc. Would anybody like to answer that?
I believe that this is a question for me. As I was talking about this digging for gold. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I think most of you know the Gross book about Jedwabne, but I'm not sure if you know that his another book about digging for gold. He named it Golden Harvests. And that was the first well-known book on the topic. Nowadays, this is being researched and written about. And for example, we've got a reportage book, unfortunately only in Polish till now, Płuczki, about gold digging. And as far as we know, those procedure was conducted in Belzec, Sobibór, Treblinka, but it was not well researched, so it's very hard to say how widespread it was. If you research, choose a former camp and research it, I don't know a camp where you would not find a clue about gold digging. And a former genocide place where it was not, that was not searched for gold. But it's a hard topic, and I cannot tell how, if it's true that all the places were, let's say, searched, excavated.
Just as a footnote, if I may, Gross book, with all due respect, was, very important for the public sphere, but by far not the first book about the topic. First of all, we have to consider Jewish sources in Yiddish, plus early 1940s articles and debates taking place in Poland. 1940s is really like a thing, like a debates to consider simply. So so not the first one, but really a forgotten one, and of course the problem of non-presence of Jewish sources in Polish debates is another problem.
Yeah, sorry, I meant that it was the one that started the wide discussion.
Okay, thank you. Boaz, Dr. Boaz, Cohen, you had a question to Dominique. Would you like to address her?
Why don't you read it?
Okay, so Boaz asked, this is for Dominique, what can you say about the verdicts of Jews in Polish courts? Harsh, lenient, regular, and to Katarzyna, is there no mention of Jews or other mass executions victims? So please.
Yes, what can I say about the verdict? A lot of things, I guess. Yes, the verdict differ from Jews to Poles, but it's not only, what is interesting is it's not only the verdict that differ, but the procedure. I will take the same case I presented. In the case of Takus, if we compare this case with other one with the same accusation, you can see that the other accused normally can bring witnesses to the court to testify in their for their case, and in the Takus case nobody came, and it's really weird because the interaction between Takus and the police officer were made during the day in a train with full of people. So this is one thing you can say. The judge, obviously some of them are anti-Semitic, have anti-Semitic sentiment regarding the Jewish accused, and sometimes they will follow a different path of actions. They will not follow the code of procedure or the criminal code that they used, but nobody care. They have full power in court, so you can see that. But I have to say that sometimes you can see the opposite. You can have judges that are concerned about the Jewish situations. I have a few cases, but some of them of Jewish accused, and they were found guilty, but the judge decided to not ask the Jew to pay the fees because, and I quote, one of the Jews will say they already lived in the ghetto, so they already paid. It's already difficult for them. But most of the time, the judge they won't care about the Jewish situation in the ghetto, and they won't talk about that. So this is what I say. So yes, the verdict, but mostly in the procedure. Did I answer the question correctly?
Katarzyna, would you like to answer?
Oh yeah. About if the Jewish victims are mentioned, they are mentioned on the monument. Like the monument mentions Polish, Jewish, and Russian victims. But during the mass, okay, that's very problematic. I've took part in 2 of them, and the first one was anti-Semitic. The priest's talk was anti-Semitic and anti-European Union, very right-wing, nationalistic. And the second one was soft, but more or less not mentioning Jewish victims. And the school ceremony after the mass, it does not mention Jewish victims. Those are usually kids that are singing Polish patriotic songs and telling poems, also patriotic poems. There's one poem written about the Krampus executions, but it does not mention Jewish victims, just victims. And it's also used during those ceremonies. But the rest of the poems are mostly about, they are about different places in Poland where people suffered, but those were Polish victims, definitely Polish victims. Did I answer your question?
Okay. Daniela, you wanted to?
Yeah, we have a question for Jan. Jan, I have a question. Okay. What view does your research take on the role of the SS in Belzec, given the mixed makeup of guards and SS men? How do you contextualize ideas of SS power and domination in your research, especially when looking at everyday relations between the camp and the village?
That's actually an excellent question, and something that was really outstanding in the testimonies. SS men are mostly absent from the daily depiction of communal life in the next to the camp. If they appear very fearful. There's a lot of humiliation. There's sexual violence on Christian villagers in the camp. In the village next to the camp. One testimony is particularly fascinating because the woman was formerly married to a Volksdeutscher, an ethnic German, who was working at the camp. So she was the question of guilt and also pleasure to benefit from the killings was a very powerful testimony. For the Travniki guards, for the Ukrainians, because there was indeed a good way to pose it, the mixed max. The Travniki, so far, these testimonies fill up a huge gap in the literature, in my opinion, because so far we have a lot of German perspective from German trial courts. I mean, we have all the we have even a Netflix documentary now on Ivan the Terrible. But these Polish testimonies really shed a new light on these really autonomous independent community within the camp, which were the Travniki Guard. It's an essential source for understanding the motivations, the pleasure to kill, sometimes the guilt, sometimes they were fleeing with Jewish victims. And still much is enclosed of the Russian archive. So I think these testimonies are an essential part to shedding more light on this. But it's an excellent question.
We have another question for Andrew. Andrew, do Polish police reports contain observations on the German units that perpetrated violence against Jews and Soviet POWs? And this person is saying, I'm looking for the activities of Scandinavian SS volunteers in Eastern Galicia, June, July 1941.
Well, thank you for the question. To answer the latter part first, the file of reports that I've been working with begins in a later date than that early period. So there's no information on that early period at all in the file. And the reports themselves were written by an officer or a man in the Polish Creepo who personally fired his weapon for whatever reason, and then he went on to explain what kind of ammunition he used and the reason for why he fired. So there isn't that, they don't contain information to on other units besides their own actions.
Okay, thank you. There's a question to the whole panel. This is to all of you. How do you use gender as a category of analysis in your research? What kind of insights will you get which otherwise remain silenced/omitted? This is to all of you.
Okay, maybe I can start if you can hear me well. So I use it in at least two ways. I mean, just beyond going merely talking about sexual violence within specifically organized women's camp and children's camp, which was located in one of the cities I'm analyzing. It's also very interesting to use this category for analyzing ideology. And for example, this is very interesting in the case of Sarajevo, where there was a very significant Muslim relative minority in the city, which where the issue of the role of women within the political order actually becomes a top issue in the relationship between the Ustasha regime and Ustasha ideology and the Muslim religious, the religious community, Islamic religious community in the city. And the way that this is represented, and what the crucial issue is how are women supposed to be treated by a fascist movement? So the Ustasha movement argues that all the women, regardless of age, should actually, especially the young women, should become members of the Ustasha youth, which means that they should become politically active and equally participate in the public life. Now, this was, for example, very scandalous for the leaders of the Islamic religious community in Sarajevo, and they saw this as an intrusion of hardcore secularism into the places which were not touched by anyone before. Not even the Yugoslav regime attempted to do this, and they were constantly complaining about intrusions from the outside. So it's very interesting to look at these issues of gender, secularism, and religion and fascism in a very entangled way as well.
Okay, would anybody like to add? Okay, so there's another question for Katarzyna. This one's for Karen Remler, and she asks, would you elaborate on the concept of necrotopography? To what extent has the forensic turn in Holocaust studies provided a framework for taking the response of locals during the process of excavation or marking the presence of remains and their symbolic meaning?
Okay, I use the concept according to research on topography and topology of non-sites of memory. You may be familiar with Caroline Strudiko's research on forensic research on the Holocaust. And as far as I know, this topic of searching for God is not investigated by her. And I don't know, I don't know any forensic project that focus on this topic, though I think you may be interested in Zuzanna Dziuban's work. She is interested in this digging procedure and reusing Jewish gold, like even reusing the teeth that are found in the place in order to prepare another golden teeth. So Zuzanna Dziuban is definitely the right address to be searched for the proper answer. That's all I will.
Katarzyna, there is another question for you from Jonathan, and is asking, when interviewing local witnesses of genocide and excavators, do you ever face pushback or negative reactions? How do you balance this in your research?
That's a very good question and a very hard one. Yeah, indeed it happens. And I've, for example, heard that I will make another Jedwabne in Krempiec. So people are afraid, and due to Polish national politics, they are afraid even more recently. And they want to, let's say they are more open if I ask also about Polish underground movement, not just about Jewish victims. How do I work with that? I'm not a historian. I research the memory. I'm from the field of cultural studies. So that's what interests me. I simply write about those way of also of treating me in some kind of autoethnographical parts of my research papers. But indeed, it's a problem, and I sometimes feel that people don't know how much do they tell me, and I'm not sure if they would tell me some things if they would be aware that I am really interested in those topics. Those are, let's say, side topics that are mentioned by them after long talks. On the other hand, to not to use those people, I also write sometimes about what's important for them. For example, I'm preparing an article about one of my interviewed interlocutor's father, about his action of taking photographs in Krempiecki forest. That was really an impressive action of Polish underground movement.
Okay, thank you. I think there's another question for you, Katarzyna, from Jan. Jan is asking, when did the local annual Catholic Mass start commemorating Polish resistance?
The whole act of commemorating using Catholic Mass started about 8 years ago. I'm not sure if it's 8 or 9, something like that, when a new priest arrived. He was simply new at the place, and he was talking with people, with his new neighbors, and he found out that there's a problem with the place, that there's no language to talk about this place, and that people don't know how to behave there. So it was, on one hand, a great idea, really great idea, to help the locals to deal with the traumatic or contaminated place, non-place of memory, this way. But of course, his attitude to the Jewish victim, okay, it's maybe worth mentioned, but or worth to be researched, but very hard.
Okay. Any further questions? Would somebody like to ask right now? I have a question for Dominic. Dominic, what is your estimation of identity cards Yad Vashem can complete from your research?
I'm working on 3 cities, and just for my dissertation, I have more than 100, maybe 300, something like that. It's not like the case I presented. This is a lot of information. Some of that I have less, but I always have name, date of birth, sometimes date of death. This is rare, but I have some. So yes, maybe a few hundred.
Okay. Very interesting.
I have to contact them. I have to make because I have to give the archives with the answer.
Okay, so if nobody, Boaz, would you like to say something?
Well, shut up. I would like to say thank you to the presenters. I learned so much today. And I always tell people when we talking, they ask what new can be said about the Holocaust. What new stuff can be said? I mean, come on, they've been researching this for decades. And every time I go to a conference, I see there's so much new stuff, whether it's new in the field of finding new documents, new in the way of new approaches, and new in the sense of looking at memory practices. Actually, we have the next session is to be in an hour after this one, is titled Memory Wars, and actually this was a memory war session too. So actually we see the whole thing is alive. We are learning more and more, and I think why I would really like to thank all the participants, all the presenters.
Ich nehme immer dieser Online-Konferenz teil.
But it's also but it's also very good to see the new generation of people doing good, really interesting stuff, and enlarging our knowledge, widening our scopes, and showing us that history can be done in several different ways. So really, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Boaz. I think we'll conclude this session. We will go take a break now and come back in 1 hour, 4:30 Western Galilee time, and 9:30 in the morning East Coast time. So I'd like to thank all our presenters. Thank you very much, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.